Welcome back to the Resilience Key podcast. I'm your host, Steph Corbell, and as always, I'm happy to be here with you today to explore yet another topic designed to help you channel your inner grit into personal growth. If you're looking for real practical advice to help you on that self-improvement journey, you are in the right place right now. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any future episodes. I release a new one every single Friday morning. You can subscribe on any major podcasting platform along with YouTube now. So stay tuned as I'll be doing plenty of future videos as part of this podcast. Now, as happens from time to time, I originally had an entirely different topic picked for this week's episode. And due to circumstances in my own life, I decided today, as I was drafting this episode, to go in an entirely different direction. So if you follow me online, you will know that a few days ago, I had to put my beloved kitty to sleep. It was expected, and he had been sick for a good year and a half, and he was really old. But no matter how many times I've had to say goodbye to a beloved pet, it never actually gets easier. And I think if you're an animal person like me, that you totally get this. It's kind of the one awful thing about pet ownership, eventually having to make that call when it's just time. Anyhow, this whole thing got me thinking, and I realized I've never actually done an episode on grief as part of this podcast. So that's what today is about. It's about how we deal with grief and how we should approach others who might be going through grief. So here's the thing, and this is not meant to be a downer, this is just reality. When it comes to life, there is literally only one way out. And it's funny to me, the one thing that's completely inevitable about living happens to be the one thing we tend to avoid thinking about. It's the one thing that terrifies us. It's the one thing we can't possibly understand. I mean, who knows what happens on the other side of death, right? I'm not about to speculate myself on that. I've always just reasoned that I'll figure it out when I get there and not worry about things that I can't do anything about. But another thing about life that's inevitable if we live long enough is that people or pets that we love dearly are going to pass on before we do. That is a universal thing. And so what happens when someone or a pet that we love dies? We grieve. That also is a universal. But here's the thing. While grief is indeed universal and it's unavoidable, the ways in which we all actually do it are completely different. The ways in which we grieve are individual, and often it's going to be different in every situation in which we encounter tragedy. So the way that you grieve one thing might not exactly be the same the next time something happens. Now, I've had grief responses that have ranged from crying jags of 8 hours on my bathroom floor, that was during my divorce from my first husband, to actually having no tears at all for years, and that was when my mom died. Seriously, after she passed, it took me 2 full years to finally feel something, and then when the grief hit me, oh my God, it was like this crazy tidal wave. In other situations, my own grief over loss has been a very quiet thing. I often don't want to talk much or need to talk much. That's kind of my current situation right now as I'm mourning the loss of my best buddy here. What is important, though, when we grieve is simply to allow ourselves to express our grief in whatever way works for us in that particular moment. What is important is not to judge ourselves. What is important is to give ourselves grace. For example, we shouldn't be telling ourselves things like, "Oh, stop crying, you should be over this by now." Grief is a process, and it's one that's certainly not linear in any respect. I've always compared it to waves in the ocean. Sometimes those waves are relatively calm and they wash over you somewhat unnoticed. But at other times, those giant waves simply knock you over. Whatever you do, whatever has happened, give yourself space to experience your grief in your own individual way. Don't try to stop it, because if you do, it's only going to come back stronger. And it's one of those things that you just have to go through and trust that eventually you'll come out on the other side. And on a journey of grief, it often gets much worse before it gets better. But I guarantee you, it does get better, but just in time. And there's no substitute for that passing of time. We simply have to sit with those uncomfortable and hard, sad, at times torturous feelings until enough time passes that those waves ebb a bit and we start to find some relief. And even then, though years may pass, another wave might hit you and there you are again, grief. I know you. I acknowledge you. That's all perfectly natural. One of the hardest things about going through a grief process can be the people around you that try to support you. And while I feel like most people who care about you have the absolute best of intentions, how they express their support for you might not actually be ideal for what you need. And that's where things can actually get really hard. For example, my biggest pet peeve is when folks tell me during a hard time that everything happens for a reason. And yeah, I do have an old episode about that. I will link it in the show notes. Oh my God, those words, everything happens for a reason, that can cut like a knife when you're experiencing a loss. Like, you mean to tell me some universal force meant for this person or this thing to be taken away from me intentionally so that I can suffer? Really? So, if you are grieving, don't be afraid to ask for space from your loved ones if that's what you need. Don't be afraid to withdraw for a while. Don't be afraid to not respond to everyone who says very well-intentioned things, especially if you're not quite in that headspace yet. It's okay to go into your own safe place for a bit and to feel all the feels and to cry all the tears and to not speak or even to punch a wall if that's what you need. Whatever works for you works for you. For me, when I'm in a state of grief, I generally need a lot of space and quiet, and then I have two things that I do. One is I work a lot, and two, I work out a lot. I mean, I killed my leg day this morning, for example. Other people might not understand what you're doing, but be strong in yourself and know that what you're doing is what works for you, and that is perfectly fine. Now, moving on. If you're someone who's looking at a friend or a loved one who's experiencing life-shattering grief right now, what can you do to help? This is the hardest thing. Now, look, I'm definitely not a psychologist. I am no grief specialist, but if you ask me, the number one thing you should do for someone who's grieving is simply hold space for them to do or say or act however they need without judgment. In short, just shut up. Don't relate your stories about your own experiences unless that person grieving wants to hear about it. Don't give advice unless it's asked for. And don't state those awful adages like everything happens for a reason. Dear God, don't do that. What means the most to someone who's grieving? Simply ask them what they need. Then respect that and do that. Remind yourself, in supporting someone else in grief, that this moment isn't about you at all. I don't know why it's so hard for so many people to simply hold space for others in this way. Maybe it's because watching someone else go through something reminds us that it can happen to us. So if we fix them, it's like we get this insurance policy that that terrible thing is never going to happen in our own lives. I don't know if that's the case, it's just my theory. But if there's anything any of us need to practice in our daily lives, it's simply learning to listen more than we speak and allow space for others to do what they need. I'm still working on this too. We all are. In closing, if you're going through a hard time and you're grieving a loss, or if you're trying to be there for someone else going through a loss, remember that this moment, while unavoidable, it's not going to last forever. It may come and go like the waves, but eventually it too will pass and fade into memory. Yes, I know this is a very different kind of episode today for sure. I'm certainly more introspective than usual and after this couple hard days. I hope you got something out of this short episode, though, and if so, I would absolutely love to hear from you. You can reach out to me at my website at stephcorbell.com, that's Corbell. You can subscribe and comment on YouTube. You can share this episode on your social media via whatever podcast platform you use, and find me on social. I'm at Steph Corbell on Instagram and at The Resilience Key on YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok. Thank you so much again for listening, and until next week, remember that you're more resilient than you realize, and you're stronger than you know.